So I would like to welcome everybody to their after-lunch panel entitled Urban Conflict and Identity During the Wars of Religion. My name is Daniela Kostrin. I'm an associate professor of French history at Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis, and I am serving as chair of this panel. I will be introducing each speaker just before they talk. So at this point, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, who is Dr. Amanda Eurich, who is professor of history at Western Washington University. Her book, Anatomy of a Fortune, The House of Foix Navarre-Albret, examines the militarization of noble households during the Wars of Religion. That book was published in 1994, and since then she has published many articles on Huguenot culture and religious violence in early modern France. She is currently working on a book project about Jean de Cora, the famous Toulousian magistrate that presided over the Martin Guerre case. She is also a former president of the Western Society for French History. Her paper today is entitled Anatomy of a Massacre, the Season of St. Bartholomew's in Toulouse.
Thank you. On the evening of the 3rd of October, 1572, a band of militant Catholics stormed the gates of the Conciergerie and Jacobin convent in Toulouse, sword and cutlasses in hand. One by one, they dragged inmates, mostly Protestant or Protestant sympathizers, from their cells, then slashed their throats or gutted them in this prison square. By morning, some 200 to 300 bodies were lying on the ground. Most had been stripped of their clothes, their naked bodies exposed to the purient gaze of locals who came to gawk at the traitors before their mass burial 2 days later. According to most contemporary accounts, the vigilantes reserved special punishment for the renowned Protestant judge, Jean de Coras, and his colleagues, whose corpses were paraded through the streets of Toulouse to the courtyard of the Palais de Justice, where they were hung wearing the red robes of their office. In the aftermath of this Toulousan iteration of the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris, local chroniclers were quick to point the blame, producing competing narratives which underscore the complex matrix of personal, political, and religious conflicts that sparked bloody reprisals throughout France during what Jules Michelet christened the season of St. Bartholomew. One of the most interesting of these accounts, the Brève Instruction de ce qui a passé à Toulouse, penned anonymously a month after the October 3rd massacres, suggests that the roots of the massacre in Toulouse can be found in the bitter intra-confessional contest for political control of the city after the Peace of Saint-Germain ended the third round of hostilities in the French Wars of Religion in 1570. Scholars have suggested that the narrative, which reads in part like an administrative memorandum, may have been produced for the benefit of Henri de Montmorency d'Anville, appointed governor of Languedoc in 1563 and charged with the difficult task of peacekeeping. The author of the November Chronicle, in all likelihood a Catholic of politique inclinations, insisted that the massacre in Toulouse was not a spontaneous popular uprising promoted by religious anxieties or, quote, émotion, unquote. There were, he averred, almost no common rabble-rousers involved in the bloody reprisals, which he attributed to the veterans of a radical Catholic party within Toulouse, hell-bent upon purging the city of known or suspected Protestant leaders and frightening more moderate Catholics into embracing their political vision and leadership. As Robert Schneider has suggested more than 2 decades ago, the posthumous execution of the bodies of Coras and his companions was almost certainly directed as much toward parliamentary moderates as towards Protestant heretics, both of whom threatened the inviolable Catholicity of this grand bastion of orthodoxy in the Midi. This first-hand account of the massacres in Toulouse in 1572 points to the political turn in recent histories of the wars of religion in France. Prominent among those who have underscored the deadly role of personal hatreds and political infighting is Alan Tulchin. Tulchin has described the provincial massacres that followed in the wake of St. Bartholomew's as attempts by, quote, one side or the other to seize power, end quote, especially by those seemingly disadvantaged by the Peace of Saint-Germain. In drawing attention to the political stakeholders, Tolchin echoes Janina Steb, Robert Snyder, and Philip Benedict, who have all emphasized the highly politicized nature of the 1572 massacres in the Midi. Even Denis Crouzet, whose magisterial Les Guerrières de Dieu has deepened our understanding of the religious pathologies behind the French Wars of Religion, contends that the key actors in the bloody drama that unfolded in provincial France in the fateful fall of 1572 were men who had been, quote, ousted from power, end quote, 2 years earlier. The conspiracy theory, sketched out in such minute and compelling detail in the Brève Instruction, accentuates how long it took for tempers to flare in the cities of the Midi. News of the massacre in Paris reached Toulouse more than a month before the gory October slaughter took the lives of Jean de Corras and so many of his co-religionaries. Rather than fanning the flames of religious violence, Toulousan magistrates urged citizens to remember that their first responsibility was to uphold the king's law and remain true to the Edict of Saint-Germain. 4 days later, working in close concert with the town council, the Parliament of Toulouse ruled that the king's orders did not prohibit the, quote, restraint of those exercising the honest profession of the so-called new religion, quote. The general dragnet that followed rounded up so many members of the Huguenot community that 2 of the city's monasteries were pressed into service to house the detainees. Parliamentary officials couched their actions as peacekeeping measures, even as they drafted a 14-point petition calling upon the king to repeal the provisions of the Peace of Saint-Germain, which had limited their jurisdiction over heresy cases. Chafing under the pointed rebuke they felt they had suffered, Toulousan magistrates pleaded for the restoration of their full sovereignty, just as the king's other parliaments enjoyed, over those of the so-called new religion. Over the next few days, the councillors began legal proceedings against Protestant detainees whose actions, they argued, had contravened the king's edicts. Still, it was only after the arrival of 2 Toulousan merchants, Pierre Delpech and his son François, from Paris, that a small band of Catholic zealots in their circle were galvanized into action. On the eve of St. Francis Day, Friday, October 3rd, Pierre Delpech swaggered into the gates of Toulouse and promptly began announcing his intention to, quote, do as had been done in other places, end quote, claiming that he had received orders from the king himself. According to the November Chronicle, Delpech's harangues did not go unnoticed. The first president of Parliament, as well as other leading notables, attempted to moderate religious tensions, but to no avail. The Chronicle depicts the small band of men who carried out the St. Francis Day massacre in Toulouse as singularly focused. At the invitation of Pierre Delpech, some of them dined together, perhaps sealing their resolve in a kind of ritual Last Supper before heading to the city's prison. Eager disciples full of wine and blind courage, they were joined by a rowdy group of university students with similar sympathies who had also shared a common meal at the Collège of Sainte Catherine and Périgord, just a stone's throw away from Corras's former classrooms. Sometime after 10 in the evening, they all made their way to the conciergerie, where the prison guard opened the gate after the assassins uttered the prearranged password Saint François. The slaughter that followed is described as a slow, deliberate, premeditated strike that took 6 hours from start to finish. Furnished with a predetermined list, the assassins called for their victims, quote, one after the other, end quote. Who were these self-appointed vigilantes? Beyond the infamous ringleader Pierre Delpech, the November Memoirist names 24 or so of those who purportedly stormed the conciergerie and the Jacobin monastery. A close examination of the roster reveals that many of the chief assassins have been linked for more than a decade by marriage, by business, and by their common commitment to Catholicism. Like Corras and his companions slain by their command, they too comprised a sacred fraternity, one sworn to protect Toulouse from the dangers of heresy. Pierre Delpech and his son François had a long history of Catholic activism and devotion. Like a number of others in their band, they were almost certainly part of the clandestine Catholic League established in 1561. Many had forged deep ties serving together on the town council and were among the most ardent champions of the repressive measures taken against Protestants in the aftershocks of the abortive coup d'etat of May 1562. Some, like Delpech's conspirator in Bordeaux, Pierre Mandron, were the direct beneficiaries of the purge of Protestants from the ranks of the city council in the spring of 1562. In the months that followed, Mandron, Delpech, and others in their company lobbied Parliament endlessly, urging the imprisonment of anyone suspected of Protestant sympathies. 4 years later, when the Renaissance mansion belonging to the wealthy pastillier Jean Bernoulli was seized on suspicion of Protestantism, Madron joined forces with Pierre Delpech and Jean de Gamoni and purchased it with the intent of transforming it into a Jesuit college. As Denis Crouzet has suggested, they may also have deepened their commitment to the Catholic cause as members of the penitential order established by the renowned Jesuit provincial and future confessor of Henry III, Aymon Auger, in the late 1560s. Throughout the 1560s, Pierre Delpech and company rotated onto the town council, marshaled their own private fortunes as well as civic resources, and mobilized citizen militias to protect Toulouse from Protestant attack. In 1568, 5 of the men mentioned in the November memorandum, Pierre Madron, Jean Brissot, Jean de Supersanctis, Sanson de la Croix, and François Delpech, were all elected to the town council and were likely participants in the nocturnal raid in which 400 or 500 Protestants were given a posthumous baptism in the Garonne. 2 years later, the Delpech père et fils and Pierre Madron figured among those who accused Henri de Montmorency d'Amphil of plotting with Coligny and the Protestant High Command to deliver the city over to rebel armies. Incensed by their allegations of treason, Montmorency demanded reparation from the unruly trio, who were ordered to appear before the Royal Council in Paris, where they were arrested and imprisoned in 1571. It is not entirely clear if this is why the three were still in the capital city when the tocsin sounded on August 24, 1572. As the November Chronicle intimates, however, the memories of their humiliation at Montmorency's hands were still fresh in their minds as they made their way from Paris to provincial capitals in the south. On the long journey home, so the Chronicle recounts, Madron and the Delpech plotted their revenge. Arriving in Limoges, they stirred up local students who took frenzied vows to assist them in, quote, un beau remuement de ménage, end quote, in Bordeaux and Toulouse. As Madron and the Delpech parted ways, they sealed the appointed date for the execution of their deadly plans and confirmed their commitment to the notorious rallying cry of the Saint-Bartholomeist. The king himself had ordered it. Once in Toulouse, the charismatic Delpech père drew friends, family members, and neighbors into his circle, including an innkeeper and 2 tailors, one of whom kept shop on the first floor of the Delpech residence. Family feuds, too, became part of the dense network of the connections that linked the conspirators. The morning after the prison raid, as our chronicle writes, the cold-blooded violence of the night before gave way to widespread looting. Rumors spread throughout the city that anyone implicated in the Martialiste conspiracy, denounced by Delpech and company, was open game. Among those targeted were moderate members of parliament, including Chief Justices Bertrand and Monsencal, who were forced to barricade themselves in their town houses. Several others, including 3 presiding city councillors, Crossac de Boll and Bantville, a judge, Hispania, and 2 royal officials, Chavery and Cumiez, had all been implicated on the list of suspects drawn up in 1568. Word that some Protestants had managed to escape death the night before prompted a crowd with Jean Brissot at their head, brandishing a list with the names of prisoners to return to the conciergerie. The grisly roll call produced another 13 victims. Among them, the chronicler notes wryly, were 4 recent converts to Catholicism. The second president of Parliament, Nicolas Latomy, also looms large in the November narrative. Disguised in soldier's garb, he is a pivotal player in the killings both on St. Francis Eve and in the days that followed. As the author of the Brève Instruction contends, Latomy used the occasion to carry out private vendettas against longtime enemies. In a poignant passage, he accuses Latomy of settling an old score with a woman, simply named La Francimande in the account, who had frustrated his political ambitions. Thanks to the intervention of her jailer, La Francimande had escaped the prison bloodbath and had found safe haven with a neighbor, a parliamentary procureur named Ricard. Learning of her invasion, Latomy dispatched henchmen to her house, where they found no one except her son-in-law shivering in bed with a fever. With no pity for his sorry estate, Latomy's men hauled him in his nightshirt into the streets and stabbed him to death. The chronicle portrays Latomy as relentless in his pursuit of vengeance, ordering the execution as well of the son of the procureur implicated in La Francimande's escape. Who were the political beneficiaries of the St. Francis murders? As the memorandum charges, the perpetrators continued to circulate freely in the city, and where their power to pervert justice and order went seemingly unchecked. Latourmy had managed to thwart a parliamentary investigation into the affair and had bullied a judicial official into releasing one of the leading student activists, all the while engaging in a number of intrigues to manipulate upcoming municipal elections and place his co-conspirators, here I quote the list, Delpech the elder, or Belin his brother-in-law, together with one named Brissot and a nephew, and his nephew Lacroix or Super Sanctis, and of quote, on the town council. The narrative labels the wily second president and his party as, quote, amateurs de division et discours, eager to return to the politics of retribution and violence. Choosing his words carefully, our narrator put forth, as he says, the only and most sovereign remedy, the creation of a provost with broad punitive powers and the re-establishment of the town council with men ultimately chosen by the king himself. In this vein, the narrative ends with a slate of potential candidates, men of proven administrative ability, unquestionable Catholic loyalties, and the political will to temper the passions running high in Toulouse and its hinterlands. The list of city councillors for 1573 in Germain de la Faye's Annales de Toulouse makes it clear that Latourmy failed at least temporarily in his bid to place his co-conspirators on the town council. Although only two of the candidates proposed by our anonymous chronicler, Jean Morel and Antoine de Roudel, were elected to the town council in 1573, none of those implicated in the October Massacre appear on the council rolls. The following year saw the election of two more candidates from the slate. Nonetheless, by 1575, Pierre Belin and Jean de Super Sanctis were again serving as capitouls of the Grand Republic of the Midi, steering it resolutely towards a more radical course. Their militant vision, it appears, was alive and well in a city known for its defense of religious orthodoxy. The Brève Instruction de ce qui a passé à Toulouse is a fascinating artifact of the fragile nature of peacekeeping in the late 16th century. It reveals the complicated political landscapes of early modern cities where power struggles, personal enmities, and affairs of honor pit Catholics against each other, as well as against the heretical other. In Toulouse, purging the city's institutions of Protestant heretics did little to sever cross-confessional ties created by marriage, administrative service, and shared values which blurred religious identities while at the same time further radicalizing them. As the conclusion of the religious wars would prove, appeals to outside authorities to mediate local conflict or marginalize local power brokers would ultimately require master negotiators skilled in the art of seduction, compromise, and coercion. Thank you.